Mark Twain once famously said, "Never talk politics or religion in polite company." We as a society have unfortunately taken that advice a little too far. Listen, I get that not talking politics can maintain a sense of neutrality and peace in a social situation. But unfortunately, it also perpetuates our country's growing political polarization, it inhibits growth, and it prevents us from being able to speak to one another with tolerance and critical thinking. I know that Mark Twain merely wanted us to avoid awkwardness and protect social harmony, but let me ask you this. Has it worked? Has society remained harmonious? Are we a society without conflict? Have we no political turmoil? Are we really living in peaceful, harmonious times? The data says no. In fact, we are more polarized than we have ever been. 87% of Americans fear that polarization is a threat to America. And 45% of Americans fear that members of the opposing party are downright evil. And here's the thing, it's really hard to see someone as downright evil after you've had a heart-to-heart with them. In fact, the reason why we probably see other people as a threat or as evil is specifically because we don't talk to them, we don't find common ground, and we don't have heart-to-hearts with them. It's really easy to fear a boogeyman who you've never, ever seen before. You become very vulnerable to the caricaturization of the other side when you've never connected with them. Not talking about politics might be the polite thing to do, but it is seldom the right thing to do. And I have a case study to prove it to you. Besides politics, there's one other subject matter that you've probably been told never to talk about: money. But here's the interesting thing about that rule of thumb. It is exactly why Americans are struggling in the Department of Financial Literacy. In the United States, the National Labor Relations Act explicitly protects workers' rights to discuss pay. It's legal, and yet millions of workers still think it's forbidden to talk about pay in the workplace. And they don't think that because there's a policy telling them that. They think that because our culture has taught us to self-police the things we talk about. When an entire workplace stays silent on wages and benefits, who really benefits? If person A doesn't know that person B is getting paid 20% more to conduct the exact same type of work, then person A cannot advocate for themselves. They cannot negotiate a higher salary. Research shows that pay secrecy is tied to lower wages and wider gender and racial pay gaps. Because when there isn't transparency and accountability, those in power go undetected and unchallenged. But in workplaces where there is pay transparency, there's also more trust in the system. There's greater employee retention. There are fewer wage gaps among workers. Transparency does not destabilize a system. It actually stabilizes the system. And here's another fascinating statistic. According to a survey by Pew Research, Americans are more likely to have learned about personal finances from friends and family than school, which means that most Americans who have some semblance of financial literacy actually learn about it by talking about it. Politics works the exact same way. The ultra-powerful in society do talk politics, but they tell us not to. And this is a problem. In politics, fragmentation and disconnection in society doesn't happen by accident. It happens over time of discouraging and suppressing political discourse among communities. Not making politics be a part of our culture is what leads to voter apathy, to lower voter turnout. And it ultimately makes us feel like we don't have a stake in our political system because we are not actively participating in it every day. When we stop talking about politics with our friends and our families and the people who we care about the most, we stop realizing that disagreement is a normal human thing. The other side becomes a caricature of the worst possible case scenario instead of people. And when that happens, we lose our ability to hold the system accountable because we've lost our ability to communicate with one another. Democracy thrives in numbers. And when we don't have conversations with each other, we don't have numbers, so we don't know how to show up. I get why so many people opt out of political conversation and political participation. A lot of people have tried talking politics, but maybe it ended a friendship. Maybe the conversation ended in frustration or tears or even yelling. Maybe it ended with you feeling like your values and your personhood were being antagonized and misunderstood by someone you thought you could lean on. Nearly 20% of Americans have reported losing a friend due to political differences. So we're told, time and time again, don't talk politics if you want to keep the peace. But what if the issue wasn't what we were talking about, but instead how we were talking about it? Unfortunately, we don't exactly know how to talk about politics. And what's worse, we frame politics as a zero-sum game. In order for me to win, you have to lose. And it does feel that way. We're scared to voice our opinions out of fear that we'll be criticized or judged for them. Our style of political conversation has become so ruthless and unforgiving with very little room for growth and curiosity. So of course people end up self-censoring, not just to protect their friendships and relationships, but to protect themselves too. There's also the issue of how we talk politics, leading to the accidental spread of misinformation. Political scientist Taylor Carlson found that political information shared between people in conversation can lead to information getting distorted. Because of this kind of effect like the game of telephone, the longer the chain of communication, the more likely the information is to get distorted, which helps misinformation spread. But her research doesn't suggest that we should stop speaking to each other. Rather, it suggests that we should build better political conversation habits. Stay open-minded and curious. Ask questions, fact check, and recognize that hearing something from an individual doesn't make it necessarily true or false. But also, hearing something from the media doesn't immediately make it true or false either. The problem is, since we can't talk politics with our community members, we end up relying on sources like our Instagram algorithms or our TikTok algorithms to get our daily political and world news. But the problem is that at the end of the day, Instagram and TikTok and social media are just trying to capture your attention for as long as possible. So they're not necessarily incentivized to send you the most robust, neutral, fact-checked, reliable news. In fact, they are designed psychologically to send you the most captivating news, the most sensationalized news, the news that will either stoke a strong sense of agreement or disagreement. They'll probably put you into an echo chamber so that you hear what you already believe, therefore even strongly validating your perceptions of the world already. And you'll never really be exposed to new information. Ironically, one of the best ways to break out of those echo chambers is probably to get out of the internet and into the real world and start having political conversations with real life people who are in your community who you may or may not disagree with. That way you can understand how people experience the world. You can challenge your own assumptions and encourage them to challenge their own assumptions. We constantly hear that Americans are polarized beyond repair. But is that true? According to a Time magazine article by Spencer Cox, Wes Moore, and Will Johnson, Americans are more unified than we think, but we're far less confident in how to talk to one another. Quote, "While most Americans feel confident in their moral compass, fewer feel confident in expressing the right thing, yet only half feel confident respectfully expressing their beliefs to someone with whom they disagree. But a majority of Americans also think democracy is stronger when citizens can have respectful discussions with each other about topics on which they disagree." You see, it's not that Americans don't care. And it's not that we fundamentally don't want to have political conversation with each other. It's that we just don't know how. And a lot of how we navigate our country's politics is actually inspired by fear rather than curiosity. Think about it this way. If you were offered a brand new car that was designed by world-class engineers that were specifically told that they could not talk with each other, would you buy that car? Would you trust that that car works? Definitely not. All the systems within that vehicle that are supposed to work together in harmony to make the car drive, They were designed in complete silos. Politics is that car. Politics is a system. When we stop talking about how that system is built because it's too rude or divisive or inappropriate to talk about it or to ask questions about it, that's when the steering wheel falls off. The brakes don't work, and we're surprised when we somehow end up in a ditch. Corruption thrives in darkness. We have to talk about things, to connect with each other, to listen to each other, if we want to truly build a better future for all of us. We can talk about things, even very deeply personal things, without invalidating each other's lived experiences. One thing that we know for sure is that everybody is advocating for their own best interest. Not just the people in America, but the corporations, the lobbyists, and the politicians too. So the less that we as people have conversations with each other about politics and grow to be compassionate and understanding of each other's experiences and struggles, the more vulnerable we become to the lobbyists, the corporations, and the politicians who ultimately are advocating for their own best interest in a way that keeps us in darkness, keeps us divided and polarized, keeps voter apathy high and voter turnout low, and keeps our system broken. Communication is hard. If communication was figured out, we wouldn't even need politics. There would be no war. There'd be no conflict in the world. Communication is very, very difficult. It's an art form and a science, but you know what? It's also our greatest tool. It's our greatest power as human beings, and it is something that we have to utilize, have to practice, and have to do very well if we want to advance humanity. The way to get better at something is not by avoiding it. When we start talking politics with one another, and when we start learning exactly how to do that in a way that is human, that is compassionate, that is when the people in our democracy can reclaim their power, come together as one, and fight for the future that they so dearly deserve. What do you think? Is the world better off just avoiding the conversation altogether? Or can we benefit from learning how to have respectful discourse? Let me know in the comments below.